In this video, we will be reflecting on I Love You by The Neighborhood in my new series, Tumblr Retrospective, where we pick albums that were super popular on the platform and we tackle the nostalgia. Is it really as good as we remember? Let's find out. You're watching Tumblr Retrospective on The Current.
All I am is a man.
The Neighborhood is a 4-piece band from California with 2 former members, one which left due to creative differences, and the other one was kicked out of the band due to... you can Google this. The band is fronted by Jesse Rutherford, who you probably know from his recent controversial relationship with Billie Eilish. Also hosts members Jeremy Friedman, Zach Abels, and Mikey Margot. They are most famous for their hit song, Sweater Weather. Apparently the song had a recent resurgence on TikTok, which I do not know much about. However, there's quite a few songs by The Neighborhood that are very popular. However, they're not on the album that we will be talking about today. Despite its release over 10 years ago, Sweater Weather is still incredibly relevant. The band The Neighborhood have a very long-standing relationship with Tumblr. If you go to The Neighborhood's website to this day, their website is still under a Tumblr URL, but they bought the domain name. You still have to accept Tumblr's terms and conditions, and I thought that was really funny and interesting. Before we get started, it was genuinely really difficult to find anything about this album, about the recording process, or about where it was recorded. Genuinely, I went down the whole Genius article, I went through various interviews, I watched various interviews on YouTube, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll get into that a little bit. That's interesting, but this video is probably going to be very short due to this. I think at the time it was really popular on Tumblr because people resonated with the angsty lyrics, like if we look at Afraid or Female Robbery. Those songs were very popular on the platform, and I think a lot of people related to the kind of vibe and moodiness that it was exuding. The Neighborhood was very popular for their all-encompassing aesthetic and experience. They would put photos, their music videos, or any kind of media that was uploaded by them, they would put it all in black and white, and that was kind of their whole thing. I remember seeing them at Reading. Even the screen that had the cameras filming the stage had the visuals in black and white. Like, they would go to that extent in order to have the screen that was visible to the crowd have that in black and white. They went really above and beyond in order to keep up with this black and white aesthetic. In a memo sent to journalists covering this month's Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival, The Neighborhood asked that its early afternoon set be photographed only in black and white. A silly request? For sure, but it's one entirely in keeping with the devotion to style that runs through Sweater Weather. The meaning behind the black and white aesthetic, however, Brian Samus mentioned in an interview, so this is the ex-member. It's funny because he's not in the band, but most of the interviews that I found about The Neighborhood, where it's actually being most explained about what the black and white means, what the logo means, etc., are actually from him. It seems that he was taking it most serious, but then he ended up leaving the band even before they recorded Wiped Out. Anyway, so he says in an interview with DIY Mag, "We didn't want to have any preconceived notions about what our band was about before hearing any music. The monochromatic glimpses that followed," Brian adds, "are just as much part of who we are as the music is. We're really big on having a whole experience for people. The music and the aesthetics together make up what we do. We feel like when you buy a band's album and you see the artwork and their logo and their color scheme or whatever, and then you go listen to the song, you have a feel for it. If everything we put out was in color, our songs would sound different. There would be a different vibe, you know?" But anyway, I also read somewhere else that they made it black and white because they didn't want people to judge them for their looks, which I think is interesting because the I Love You album had such mixed reviews. It ended up having some sort of like adverse effect. I think also at the time for bands, it was not really custom to have such requests to do all the interviews in black and white, Instagram pictures. In a recent interview that Jesse Rutherford did just on his own to promote his new solo work with Zane Lowe, they were also talking about how apparently if you uploaded a picture with the neighborhood, it had to be black and white, and if you uploaded it in color, you would be asked to remove it and change it to black and white. And I think at the time, to critics and such, it came across a little bit pretentious. It ended up having the opposite effect of what they wanted, which I think is a bit of a shame because it was cool. At the time, we had the Holy Trinity, Arctic Monkeys, the 1975, the neighborhood. They also all had like a very strong black and white era around the same time. The neighborhood was definitely the one that was following it through the most. Then there were a few other stylistic choices, like adding a U to the spelling. So if you're talking about the neighborhood, you actually do have to spell it with a U. It's British spelling. But they would also have funny spelling for California, for example, with a U. And they were also quite notorious for their love of fonts and typography. In one particular interview, the interviewer asks Jesse Rutherford to name different fonts, and he's actually not that good at it. I think he got like 2 or something, and he sounds kind of pretentious at one point because he's like, I'm trying to figure out the weight of it, like, shut up. Like, also, they were not really graphic designers. I remember in a different interview as well, I think Jesse Rutherford said that he had different folders for different fonts that he downloaded or something like that. And there's apparently also a very infamous incident where Mr. Rutherford refused to eat at a certain restaurant because the menu used Comic Sans. I think if you eat at a restaurant and the shitter it looks, the better the food is, because they're not focused on what the menu looks like, what the decor looks like. They're trying to entice you in, usually, if the decor is very extravagant. It usually means the food is not that good. If the food is great, they don't give a fuck about what anything looks like. But that's just little rule for you. Now, let's stop talking about trivia and let's get into the music.
All of these shells holding the things.
The band The Neighborhood is very influenced by hip-hop in general. Even later in their career, they made a whole mixtape that they uploaded for free to datpiff.com. But they're from California, obviously, so hip-hop is very ingrained into their musical style. Brian Samis mentions again in an interview with Lady Gun, "We all listen to a lot of hip-hop. It kind of naturally comes out of us. 90s hip-hop records have drums and beats that are so engulfing, huge, fat-sounding beats that aren't necessarily complicated, but you get into that groove and you find that rhythm, and we all love that. So our songs usually start with a rhythm section, drums and bass, which is heavily hip-hop influenced, adding guitar to anything inevitably has people saying rock. But our goal was to make guitars that didn't necessarily sound like guitars. A lot of times we're trying to push boundaries of what instruments are supposed to do what. Get our guitars to sound like organs or church bells or whatever. And then inevitably Jesse writes pop melodies. That's his background. So that's the groundwork, and then you put the pop vocals over it and you have the bare bones of a neighborhood song." Now, before we get into talking about the album, let's talk about, again, what I remembered from the album. Before doing this video, I didn't really revisit this album that much. Like, I think I listen to Sweater Weather quite regularly, but it's also one of those songs that if you go shopping or something, it just comes on. It's not unusual to just hear it in public or exactly hear it over a TikTok edit. The Neighborhood is actually still my most listened to artist on my Last FM. That is because in 2014, I moved to London at the time. I had an iPod, you know, that tiny thin iPod, and that thing was so good at syncing how many times you listen to a song. There's none of that BS that you have to do today where you connect your Last FM to your streaming and it keeps disconnecting. Like, it scrambled when you synced your iPod with your computer again, and it was incredibly accurate. I think this is one of the only reasons that, for example, I still haven't listened to BTS or Brockhampton more than I had listened to The Neighborhood, because it was literally genuinely scrobbling and taking count of every song, and that's why it's still really hard to knock that one out of the park. Yeah, I was obsessed with The Neighborhood. Like, it was unhealthy. As you can see, I even own really old merchandise, own one of their albums down here. I would have put the Wiped Out album in the back here, but my mom has the case. But I was incredibly obsessed with The Neighborhood. I think what they were trying to do, as in, like what I just mentioned, mix that hip-hop with indie. It was just, to me, at the time, very interesting, very new. I was just so fascinated by it. Even before I got into The Neighborhood, I was a big Kanye fan and a big Tyler, the Creator fan. Those two worlds colliding, because I also really liked indie music at the time. I still do. And also The Neighborhood having a very respectful relationship with other hip-hop artists, like the Black and White mixtape that they uploaded to DatPiff had so many hip-hop features, and I think even still they were credited on a YG album. They respect hip-hop as well. You never would see them wearing braids or something like that. There is a few times where Jessie isn't wearing a grill, but still, I think in general they had a good relationship with hip-hop, and I think that's why I really liked it at the time. I think I only saw them live twice. One time was at Concord in Brighton, and then I saw them at Reading, like I just mentioned. But yeah, so that's what I remembered from that album. Listening to it again, revisiting this album again, I do have to say I understand why this album had mixed reviews at the time. I think it's upsetting because I do genuinely still think that the mixing indie with hip-hop and giving it such a California vibe is such an interesting premise. However, I think this album aged poorly. There's a few songs on this album that really take that Lana Del Rey sample pack so far. There's like this sample of a bird and it like echoes out, or just people yelling yeah, or it just takes so many elements of what was popular at the time, and you never hear those samples anymore, which just makes it very much of the time. If you listen to the album, you will definitely hear it and you'll recognize the kind of samples that I mean. At the time, I really liked every single song on this album, but I think now I don't like every song as much. Again, there's some songs that are very strong, like Alleyways or What Do You Want From Me, Afraid. Those are very good songs with interesting lyrical content, very much an angsty fear of aging, fear of growing up, also topics that were very popular at the time. Sweater Weather obviously is just a love song, I would say, also to California in general. On the Genius article for Sweater Weather is one of the neighborhood's most successful tracks, peaking at number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts in December 2013 and spent 11 weeks at number 1 on the alternative charts. The music video for the track reached 100 million views in December 2015 when the video was merely 2 years old. Sweater Weather is the first song the band had ever written together, composed during their first practice around a year prior to its release. Then we have the Wikipedia article about the song Sweater Weather. Zach Abels records at radio.com. One day Jesse was at my house and I was playing guitar and he said, "Hey, that's pretty cool, let me record that." And it just happened to be Sweater Weather. When we got done writing the song, when it was all said and done, we were like, okay, this is pretty good, we should keep writing songs. I think Sweater Weather might have been the best song we've ever written, Rutherford added. But I didn't think it was going to be the best song we'd ever write. It was kind of like getting a platinum record, like a little tap on the butt. I do think it's a timeless song, and I think that drum loop that they use on the song is very good, and the way it transitions into a slower version of the song, but it still works really well. That bass line is just so crunchy. I do still think it's a great song. I don't think I'll ever get tired of that song either. Yeah, I think if we're talking about the lyrical content of this album, most of these songs have lyrics about love. I can't wait for love to destroy us. I think the most lyrically interesting songs are How, Afraid, and Female Robbery. The rest of the album is just kind of repetitive and forgettable, and I also noticed that the mix is just very, don't know how to describe it, but shallow. The highs are very high, and when I'm listening to it on my headphones, I can use my EQ to put the treble and the mids like a little bit lower, and then it just sounds a lot better. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that this album had mixed reviews at the time. I didn't understand why, because I thought this album was so revolutionary and life-changing. It's interesting that they took their aesthetic so far to the point where, oh yeah, you shouldn't judge us for how we look. And I think it just kind of threw people off. People were expecting more if you were gonna go that hard for an aesthetic, and if your music is just badly mixed and lyrically not that interesting. Also, Jesse Rutherford as a vocalist is good, but if you take some of the counterparts at the time, I would even say Matty Healy is a better vocalist. Like, no shade to Jesse Rutherford. Like, I like his vocal tone. I think he's a good singer, but I would say Matty Healy can probably out-sing that. Anyway, I'm yapping so much now. Now we're gonna get into the album cover.
Fake that money, fake that dummy.
I could not find shit about this album cover. They also changed it on streaming services. They used to have the eye, the heart, and the house. Apparently that just means I love you, because I thought that was a reference to the tattoo that Jesse has on his throat. It's not. The house is the symbol that they use as the U in the neighborhood, spelling wise. Apparently they also all lived in the same neighborhood, and they were just throwing stuff upside down. That's why the house is upside down. Yeah, I would have genuinely thought there was a more interesting meaning to the house being upside down. I couldn't even find anything about the grey sky that they used on the album cover. I think that's sad because why did you choose a grey sky? You're from California. Is there some kind of meaning there? Does that maybe have to do anything with doing the opposite? Shaking things up? California's sunny. You're putting in a grey sky on your album.
I want the world in my hands. I hate.
Where is the neighborhood now? The neighborhood had a contract with Columbia for 5 albums, which ended in 2020 with their latest album, Chip Chrome and the Monotones. Before they released Hard to Imagine the Neighborhood Ever Changing, Wiped Out, and I Love You. That is 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, 4 album deal. Again, they also did that mixtape. I don't know if that falls under the contract. They are currently on hiatus, and Jesse just released a solo album that I haven't listened to. It's called Wanted. Again, there's a Zane Lowe interview where he talks extensively about the album and also some past reflective moments about the neighborhood. What I do appreciate about Jesse Rutherford, he does genuinely come across as a guy that is just making music and trying to understand the world. I never really felt like he was someone that was pretending to be someone else. He always seemed really genuine, and I think that still rings true. You can see in this interview as well, he's grown up a little bit more and he's just a little bit more comfortable with who he is. I haven't listened to the album yet, but I'm certainly curious about it. However, I would love to hear what you think. I'm not sure yet which one I'm going to cover in the new year. It might be the 1975 self-titled. It might be Lord Pure Heroin. I haven't really decided yet. But if you would like to see either of those, they will both be coming. I would love to hear what you think. As of today, this was Tumblr Retrospective on the current. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next week. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and I have a surprise for you on New Year's Eve. Please subscribe if you would like to see that, and I hope you have a happy new year. Goodbye. Wow. I do have some editor retrospective notes on the other members. Mikey Margot is currently the only member in another band. They're called Good Sport, so if you're interested in that, do check it out. Jeremy and Zach are just living their lives, don't have active Instagrams at the moment. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know if you preferred this style of script writing over the last video. I unknowingly repeat myself a lot, so I have to work on that. I still need to find my balance. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week for another video.